Why did Rosa not scream when the fire took the room? Because the scream had already lived in her throat for 20 years. That's what they say in the moss-draped hollows outside Belle Mere, where the air still smells of damp cotton and old regret. The story begins not with a woman, but with a silence heavy enough to bend wood, thick enough to make a flame flicker sideways. The house is gone now. What's left is blackened timber where the east wing used to be. Weeds grow through what once was polished wood floor, and where the bridal chamber stood, there is only ash, and lace. Some nights, especially in summer when the air hangs like a wet veil, the wind stirs strange things. A faint smell of jasmine, a singed scrap of silk caught in a cypress branch. Locals say the fire was an accident, a faulty oil lamp, a careless girl, but folk who were there that night know better. They speak in lowered voices, not out of fear but out of awe, because everything about the fire was too perfect. Too timed, too clean. The bride, Isadora Bell, had just married Franklin Dole in the Rose Chapel. She was last seen laughing, white veil pulled tight like a second skin. Within the hour, she was screaming inside her bridal suite, clawing at the locked door while the wallpaper curled inward like dried petals. And Rosa. Rosa, the quiet one. Rosa, the shadow that moved without notice, the girl with hands like stone and eyes like dusk. She was gone. No one saw her leave. No one saw her burn. But the door had been locked from the inside. They buried Isadora with a mirror cracked from heat laid across her chest. They said it was tradition. But old folks know it was to trap her reflection, keep it from walking. And so the story begins, as it always does in the South, not with answers but with smoke. A wedding night soaked in perfume and fire. A scream that no longer needed air. And a question that still lingers in the walls of Belle Mere: what did Rosa see that made her choose fire over forgiveness? Belle Mere Plantation was never meant to last. Even in its prime, the land sagged beneath it like a secret too heavy to carry. The fields bore sugarcane and whispers. The house stood tall, painted white to hide the rot beneath. And behind the bright shutters and polished silver, the true walls of Belle Mere were built, of sweat, of silence, and of the blood that no one spoke of. Rosa knew those walls better than anyone. She rose before dawn, always. Long before the rooster crowed or the mist pulled back from the fields. Her hands moved on instinct, strip the bloodied sheets from the master's bed, boil the linen, scrub until red became nothing. Then came the breakfast trays, eggs she didn't cook for herself, biscuits she'd never be allowed to taste. Her life was a rhythm of servitude played beneath the footsteps of others. Rosa never answered back. She never sighed or sulked. That kind of noise belonged to people who could afford softness. She was quiet because the world had never given her permission to be anything else. Miss Isadora liked it that way. Isadora Bell was a vision in parasol and pearl, all Southern charm and Sunday scripture. To the neighbors, she was genteel. To the house staff, she was sugar turned to venom. Behind closed doors, her voice sharpened. Her touch became slap, her orders a tightening noose. She struck Rosa once for smiling too long at a guest. Another time, she used a hot spoon to sear her forearm just for dropping a teacup. And yet Rosa's face never broke. There were no tears to clean, no curses to swallow. Her silence was armor, thick, old, and burnished by years of cruelty. Others cried, others bent. But Rosa stood inside herself like a locked room. Her back was a map of scars. Her hands were raw from lie and rope. But her eyes were still, deep, like a well so old no one remembered where the bottom was. Belle Mere sang with the laughter of the white family and the rustle of silk. But beneath it all, the house groaned with something darker. A presence not loud, not fast, but waiting. And Rosa, she was listening. Spring came to Belle Mere in slow, sticky waves. The air smelled of honeysuckle and old paper. Cicadas hummed louder than the birds. The cane fields rose green and heavy, hiding snakes beneath velvet stalks. It was the kind of spring where things bloomed just before they rotted. Miss Isadora called everyone to the veranda. Lace gloves, pink cheeks, her lips the color of crushed strawberries. She clinked a glass and smiled like she'd never known a cruel hour. "I am to be wed," she said, her voice syrupy and pleased, "to Mr. Franklin Dole of Gray Oaks." The house clapped. The kitchen staff bowed. The overseers grinned. Rosa stood in the back, eyes lowered, hands folded like folded linen. "And Rosa," Isadora added without looking back, "will accompany me as a bridal gift to my new home." Gift. That word echoed like a cough in a church. Rosa did not blink. She simply nodded and turned away before anyone saw the heat crawl up her neck. Later that night the garden was quiet. The stars hung low and the moon spilled across the stone path like silver spilt milk. Rosa walked through the lavender barefoot, searching for stillness. She found instead a bird, small, gray, and broken, crushed, with wings torn out and beak twisted toward the dirt. Isadora's voice slipped from the shadows. "You're like this bird, Rosa, pretty until broken, but you're prettier this way." A laugh, soft, almost musical, then footsteps retreating into the dark. Rosa did not touch the bird, she simply stared. Something inside her settled like ash in a cold hearth, not anger, not pain. Something quieter, a thread pulled taut. That night she did not sleep. She sat on the edge of her cot and stared at her hands, noticed the calluses, the fine burn marks, the places where her knuckles had once bled. She thought of the baby taken from her, the songs her mother used to hum before the lash stopped her voice. The house creaked as the wind passed through it. The same house that would soon no longer be hers to suffer in. And deep within Rosa's stillness, something shifted, not broken, not bent, sharpened. Rosa returned to her work without protest. She scrubbed chamber pots and polished silver with the same still hands. She nodded when spoken to, curtsied when ordered. Her posture never shifted, her voice never rose. But something had gone quiet in a new way, like the air before a storm. She did not cry, she did not speak unless called. But her silence no longer felt like surrender. It felt like breath being held. While the house buzzed with wedding preparations, lace fittings, wine deliveries, French soaps Rosa was forbidden to touch, she memorized everything. She counted every step from the kitchen hearth to the bridal chamber. She noted which floorboards creaked and which hinges stuck. She learned the rhythm of the guard dogs pacing. She watched how the wind moved through the hall at dusk. When she washed the linens for Isadora's new bed, her hands lingered near the oil lamp. Not long, not suspicious, just enough. She learned the chamber's latch didn't lock from the outside, only from within. That the window stuck halfway open unless forced. That the rug near the bed never quite lay flat. These were the secrets a house tells only to the invisible. Rosa was invisible, except in the quarters where the old women began to murmur. "That girl walks like smoke," one said, her voice papery and afraid. "Don't nothing stick to her." "She ain't blinked in days," another whispered. Like her soul done stepped out and left the rest behind. Even the children avoided her shadow. Rosa heard them but said nothing. She peeled potatoes. She swept the yard. She polished the brass rail on the stairwell until her reflection stared back, hollow-eyed and calm. In church that Sunday, when the preacher spoke of fire and brimstone, Rosa looked up for the first time in weeks. Her eyes met his, just for a second. And the old man stuttered. There was no rage in her, not visibly. No trembling lip, no clenched fist, just a stillness that grew deeper with each breath. She was waiting, not for the right moment, for the only moment. There are times when a house begins to sense what's coming, before storms, before deaths, before something sacred breaks. Belle Mare, in the weeks before the wedding, began to breathe differently, like it knew it was running out of time. The air turned heavy, even when the skies were clear. Dogs barked at empty corners, growling low at shadows that didn't move. A mirror above the parlor fireplace cracked from corner to corner during supper, though no one had touched it. "Heat," someone muttered, but no one truly believed it. A field boy fell sick after claiming he'd seen Rosa by the well in the moonlight, whispering to the dark. "She was singing to something in the ground," he said before the fever took his voice. The other children stopped playing near her. One refused to sleep, swearing that Rosa's eyes glowed red in the dusk. And still, Rosa did her work. When the bridal gown arrived, delivered in a carved trunk with golden hinges, the house gathered to see it. Lace from Paris, pearl buttons down the back, so fine it looked like spun frost. Isadora preened and posed and mocked the others for their rough hands. Rosa was ordered to sew the hem to take in the waist by half an inch. She did it in the sewing room alone. Candlelight flickering over the white fabric, her fingers pricked and bleeding into the thread. She worked without thimble, without rest, and she hummed. A soft, low melody, not joyful, not angry, a sound like earth cracking open. The cook paused outside the door, listening. "I don't know that tune," she whispered to no one. "It's a funeral hymn," an old nursemaid said. "No, it's older. It's what the bones sing when they finally get cold." Isadora never asked what Rosa was humming. She only demanded the gown be ready in 2 nights' time. It was, folded neatly, stain-free, as if the blood had vanished into the cloth. But the gown never smelled like it should have. Not of lavender, not of rosewater, it smelled like smoke. And Belle Mare's walls, swollen with secrets, began to hum low, too low for ears, but not for bones. 2 years before the wedding, before the lace and the humming, before the mirrors cracked and the dogs howled, Rosa had bled in silence for a different reason. It was Isadora's brother, Charles Bell, the eldest son, the one sent back from Charleston after some trouble with a senator's wife. He walked with too much wine in him and spoke like no one could refuse him. One night when the house was deep in sleep and the fields were silver with moonlight, he cornered Rosa in the smokehouse. She didn't scream. Screaming was for people who would be believed. When the bruises faded, she carried a quiet heaviness with her, a new rhythm in her belly. Her fingers moved slower, her hips ached, her stomach fluttered at night. The women in the quarters knew but said nothing. One of them slipped her extra cornmeal. Another placed a piece of river stone under her cot to keep death away. The baby came early, still pink, still soft. A boy. Rosa barely had time to look at him. His hair was dark and curled, his fists clenched. He smelled like milk and wet dirt, like something that belonged to the earth, not the house. She whispered a name but never got to say it aloud. Isadora appeared in the doorway the next morning, still in her silk robe. She didn't speak to Rosa, only to the overseer beside her. "Mulatto mistakes don't belong here," she said. "Sell it south." Far south. And that was the last Rosa saw of her son. No grave, no goodbye, no lock of hair, just an empty cot, still warm. She didn't weep. She pressed her hands to her belly and felt the absence like a second skin. For weeks she walked like a ghost. But grief has a way of changing shape. It begins as weight and ends as direction. She began to work again, quieter than before, sharper, her steps more measured, her gaze less forgiving. She remembered the smell of her son's sweet milk and soil. She carried it like a candle in the back of her throat. It kept her from falling. It did not ignite rage. It summoned purpose. And in the space where her child had lived, something else now grew. The day before the wedding dawned gold and false. The sky too blue, the breeze too soft, like a funeral dressed in spring's disguise. Belle Mare bustled with florists and cooks, guests arriving in wagons lined with velvet. Isadora floated from room to room like a painted swan, every step rehearsed. Rosa did not rise from her cot. She clutched her stomach, moaning low, eyes rolled just enough to suggest fever. The housekeeper clicked her tongue. "Always the frail ones when we need 'em most." Isadora waved her off. "Let her sweat it out," she muttered. "We'll manage without her." And just like that, Rosa was alone. She waited until the clatter of trays faded and the boots stopped passing her door. Then she rose, slow, steady, as if rising from burial. She opened the loose brick behind the hearth where she'd hidden her things, a vial of oil, stolen one drop at a time from lamps she'd cleaned. A strip of Isadora's hair wrapped in cloth, taken from a silver brush. A taper wrapped in old linen, tucked in her skirts for weeks. She worked in silence like she always had. In the dim hallway she moved barefoot, unheard. Her fingers brushed the porcelain doll perched on a shelf near Isadora's vanity, the one with a cracked cheek and missing eye. Isadora had loved it as a child. Had once slapped Rosa for dropping it, even though it hadn't broken then. Now Rosa carried it gently. She placed it in the bridal chamber's window, facing the chapel, its dead eye pointed toward the altar. Let that be the last thing to see the light, she thought. Not Isadora, not Franklin, not lace or veil or vow. She stepped into the bridal chamber, careful not to disturb the hemmed gown hanging like a ghost on the wardrobe door. The room smelled of lavender water, powder, and something faintly metallic. She closed the door, turned the latch, locked it from the inside. Then she knelt on the rug, taper in her lap, oil at her side. Her eyes did not close. Her lips did not move. She did not pray. She waited, for footsteps, for screams, for the moment when everything forgotten would become flame. Because some fires are not born in the hearth, They're born in the womb. The wedding feast roared with laughter and lies. Guests in brocade and silk clinked crystal under the cypress trees, their voices syrup thick with champagne and heat. The musicians played fiddle tunes near the steps, and servants darted between sweating pitchers of punch and platters of lamb. Overhead, lanterns swung like low stars. Inside, Belle Mare's halls were quiet. The air hung still, too still. Isadora rose from the head table in her bridal whites, the gown Rosa had hemmed with blood and silence. She lifted her skirts delicately and announced with a giddy laugh, "I must change into my evening silk." She floated up the stairs, unbothered, unaware. In the bridal chamber, the air was already shifting. Rosa stood in the corner, half-shadowed behind the armoire. Her hands were dry, her face calm. The oil she had poured along the rug seam glistened faintly in the candlelight. She'd soaked the lace canopy, the curtains, the hem of the spare gown, even the slippers laid neatly beside the bed. The room smelled of lavender and waiting. The door creaked. Isadora entered, still humming the tune from the garden. Then she saw her. Rosa stepped from the dark. Her eyes were darker than before, no fear, no tremble, only depth. Isadora opened her mouth to scream, but Rosa raised a hand, palm open, and whispered, "For him." Then the match struck. Flame leapt like a memory, seizing the lace and feeding on it like dry grass. Smoke curled up the walls, the curtains collapsed into fire. Isadora's scream was the sound of velvet tearing in the throat. Outside, guests froze. Then the shouting began. The house, men ran with buckets. Women shrieked, pressing lace gloves to their mouths. Children stared. The chamber window burst outward, flames licking into the night. Someone pointed, "The bridal suite." But it was too late. The fire had teeth. They broke the door open with an axe, but the room was a furnace. No sign of Rosa. No body found, no scorched dress. Only a porcelain doll at the windowsill, its cracked face melted, still staring out. Some say Rosa walked into the fire and vanished. Others swear they saw her standing in the orchard barefoot beneath the willows, watching the house burn with arms crossed like a mourner. And some say she smiled, just once. The fire didn't just consume a room, it swallowed Belle Mare whole. In the days that followed, the once proud estate drooped like a wet bonnet. Smoke-stained shutters hung loose. Vines clawed up the white columns. The laughter that had once floated down the halls was gone, replaced by creaks, moans, and silence, the kind that settled like dust and never left. They buried Isadora Belle in a white coffin trimmed with lace, her face painted over to mask what the fire had done. The preacher raised his hand to ring the chapel bell, but the rope snapped before he could pull it. It dangled like a noose in the hot wind, swaying above the guests' heads. The bell never rang again. Franklin Dole, the groom who never quite became a husband, left that night with only a satchel and a horse. Some say he never looked back. Others say he stopped at the edge of the orchard, stared at the scorched second-story window, and wept. The Bell family tried to rebuild, but the money ran dry. No one wanted to buy sugar from cursed ground. Within months, Belle Mare was sold at a loss to a New Orleans trader with more money than sense. He lasted 6 weeks before he fled. The enslaved were split like firewood. Names read aloud, chains locked, hands pulled apart. The quarters emptied slowly like blood from a deep wound. But Rosa was never found. No bones, no cloth, no ash that matched her shape. Some say she drowned in the bayou, walking into the water in silence. Others whisper she escaped north, helped by a secret line of freedmen who'd been waiting for her signal. A few swear they saw her boarding a riverboat dressed as a boy, her eyes hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. But the bridal chamber tells another story. It was never reopened. The walls, blackened and blistered, were boarded up with iron nails. No servant would sweep near it. No guest would stay in the room below. Even decades later, long after the estate fell to ruin, the chamber remains sealed. And still, the wood smells faintly of jasmine and burnt sugar, like a memory preserved in heat. A warning or a promise. Time did not heal Belle Mare, it left it hollow. The fields are wild now, overgrown with bramble and cane gone feral. The white columns have cracked, swallowed by vines. The chapel is little more than bones, timber and ivy, roof open to the sky. All that remains of the house is the east wing, sagging and blackened, a scar on the land. Children dare each other to run up the porch steps, to touch the rusted knocker, to press an ear to the boards of the old bridal chamber. Most don't make it past the threshold. They say if you stand by the door at midnight and the air is still enough to hear your own breath, you'll smell something, not rot, not mildew, but jasmine, and underneath that, smoke. Some say you'll hear a sound too, a low humming, soft as a mother rocking a cradle. A lullaby in a language no one's heard in generations. No one knows the words, but everyone who hears it leaves quiet, changed. A boy once claimed he saw her through a crack in the wood. A woman in rags, barefoot, hair hanging like ash down her back. She held a child made of fire, its skin ember glow, its eyes like coals. The boy never spoke again, just rocked on the porch of his grandfather's house until he died old and still humming. Others swear the porcelain doll still sits at the window. No one knows how. The glass is long shattered, the frame burned to bone, but on certain nights, especially the hot ones when the wind won't blow, the doll appears. Its cracked face watches the yard, and its eyes, cloudy, faintly blue, glow in the moonlight like they remember everything. The elders say Rosa never left, that she waits for those who think pain can be buried, for brides who believe cruelty dies with vows, for men who treat women like linen and furniture. They say her fire was never meant to end anything, only to begin something that cannot be undone. And so Belle Mare remains, not a ruin, not a warning, but a wound still burning. They tried to bury the fire, but fire, once it learns your name, never forgets your door. How many of our grandmothers, our mothers, our sisters were forced to stay silent when the world refused to hear their screams? Rosa may be a whisper from the past, but her fire speaks for every soul they tried to erase. If you believe stories like her still matter, stories of pain, power, and quiet vengeance, then honor her memory. Like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel so her voice and voices like hers are never forgotten again.